In the small town of Skidmore, Missouri, justice was served not in a courtroom, but in the streets. On a hot July day in 1981, Ken McElroy, a man who had terrorized the town for decades, sat in his truck when gunfire erupted. Dozens of people stood nearby, but when the dust settled, not a single witness came forward. No one admitted to seeing a thing. No arrests were made. And to this day, the murder of Ken McElroy remains an open case, but the people of Skidmore seem just fine leaving it that way. Welcome to Mystery Trails, where we uncover chilling true crime, baffling disappearances, and unexplained events across the U.S. If you love a good mystery, be sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share with your friends to help us grow. Now let's start exploring the unknown together and dive on into the story. Skidmore, Missouri was the kind of town where time moved slow, where neighbors borrowed sugar and waved from their porches, where the biggest news of the week might be a church bake sale. It wasn't the kind of place where fear ruled the streets, but for over 2 decades it did. Because for over 2 decades, one man made life in Skidmore unbearable. Ken Rex McElroy was more than just a troublemaker. He was a predator, a man whose very presence turned stomachs and quickened pulses. Towering over 6 feet, thick with muscle, and mean as they came, he had a face that never seemed to soften, always locked in a permanent scowl beneath the shadow of his cowboy hat. His reputation spread far beyond Nodaway County. He was a thief, a liar, a man who took what he wanted and left nothing but misery in his wake. McElroy was a master of intimidation. If someone crossed him, he made sure they regretted it. Their cattle might go missing, their barn might go up in flames, their windows might be shattered in the dead of night. If fear alone wasn't enough, he had other tools: a shotgun slung across his truck, a pack of loyal hounds at his side, and a ruthless ability to manipulate the legal system. No matter how many times he was arrested, no matter how many charges were brought against him, he always walked free. He had lawyers who knew how to twist the law in his favor, dragging out cases until witnesses got tired, until they backed down, until they disappeared. And if the courts couldn't protect him, he had another tactic: threats, the kind you didn't ignore, the kind that made grown men swallow their pride and lock their doors at night, knowing that Ken McElroy was the kind of man who didn't bluff. For years, the town endured his reign of terror. But in 1980, McElroy pushed too far. The target of his rage that time was Bo Bowenkamp, a quiet, elderly grocer who had dared to stand up to him. The dispute was over something petty, some stolen goods, a minor disagreement. But for McElroy, any challenge was an insult that had to be answered with violence. So he drove to the grocery store, raised his shotgun, and pulled the trigger. Bo survived barely. McElroy once again walked free, and this time Skidmore decided they wouldn't let it happen again. The morning of July 10th, 1981, was heavy with the weight of something unspoken, an understanding that lingered in the air like the thick summer heat. McElroy, oblivious or maybe just too arrogant to care, rolled into town the same way he always did, rifle in his truck, cigarette in his mouth, confidence oozing from every step. He parked outside the D&G Tavern, a small bar where farmers nursed their drinks and mechanics wiped grease from their hands, the kind of place where a man like him should never have felt safe. His young wife, Trina, sat beside him, uneasy. Maybe she felt what was coming. Maybe she had seen the way people had started to look at them, not with fear this time, but with something colder. Inside, the tavern was different that day, more faces than usual. A growing crowd of men who had spent years watching McElroy run their town like his personal kingdom. Farmers who had lost livestock to his greed. Shopkeepers who had been harassed and threatened. Families who had gone to bed scared for too many nights. No one spoke about what they were thinking, but the thought was there. Today would be different. McElroy drank his beer. The conversations in the bar were low and steady, the air thick with something dangerous. He had faced the law and beaten it, but this wasn't the law. When he and Trina finished their drinks and stepped outside, the crowd followed. They moved in silence, men and women who had spent too long swallowing their anger. McElroy climbed into his truck, turned the key, and then gunfire erupted. The first shot shattered the truck's window. Another tore through the metal frame. Bullets sprayed from every direction, rattling off steel, ripping through glass. McElroy jerked forward, his body spasming as the rounds struck him. His hands fell from the wheel. Blood pooled across his shirt. His mouth hung open, frozen in a final stunned expression. By the time the last shot rang out, Ken McElroy was dead. Trina, screaming, scrambled out of the passenger side, running into the street, her voice desperate and panicked. But no one moved. No one ran. No one so much as looked away. The town had made its decision, and there was nothing left to say. By the time law enforcement arrived, the people of Skidmore were calm, composed. The sheriff, strangely absent from town at the time of the shooting, returned to find a crime scene without a single suspect. There were bullet casings on the ground, shattered glass in the street, and a truck riddled with holes, but not a single witness. 60 to 70 people had been standing there when McElroy was gunned down, yet when questioned, not a single one could recall seeing who had pulled the trigger. The silence was impenetrable. The FBI was called in. The Missouri State Highway Patrol launched an investigation. Grand juries were summoned, but every time an officer knocked on a door, they were met with the same response. Nobody knew anything. Nobody saw a thing. The evidence told a different story. Ballistic tests confirmed that multiple shooters had fired that day. Several guns had been used, but no weapons were ever recovered, and no one ever came forward. The case remains officially unsolved. But the truth? The people of Skidmore already knew the truth. For years, Ken McElroy ruled Skidmore with intimidation and violence. He thought himself untouchable, a man above the law, too feared to ever face real consequences. But in the end, the law never had a say in his fate. The people did. What happened that day wasn't just a murder. It was something more. A reckoning. A collective decision that enough was enough. Justice, if you could call it that, was delivered in broad daylight, with a town standing witness to an execution no one would ever admit to seeing. His death was a warning, a final message written in bullet holes and bloodstains. Some evils won't be tolerated forever. The world may never know exactly who fired the shots that day, but the people of Skidmore do, and they're never going to tell. What do you think? Was this justice, or was it a vigilante act gone too far? Should someone have been held accountable, or did the town do what the law never could? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you're fascinated by true crime, disappearances, and unsolved mysteries, be sure to subscribe to Mystery Trails. Every week we dive deep into America's most chilling cases, some solved, some still waiting for answers. And don't go anywhere just yet. Our next story takes us into another dark and twisted mystery, one that will leave you questioning everything. Click the next video and I'll see you there. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.